Welcome to Ifa Stories, where ancient wisdom meets modern storytelling. Step into the sacred tradition of Ifa, rooted in Yoruba land and shaped through centuries of interaction with neighboring West African cultures and preserved in the Lukumi tradition of the diaspora. Here we engage the Ifa divination corpus, the sacred Odu through which Òrúnmìlà reveals insight into destiny and moral order, reflected in the lives of Orisha, Irunmole, Awos, communities, and all who seek guidance. These are not distant myths, but living teachings, bridges between past and present, illuminating responsibility, consequence, and the human path. Honor the wisdom. Reflect on destiny. Journey with us into the heart of Ifa. Subscribe and let the stories speak. Learn more at ifastories.com. Introductory note. This retelling draws on a traditional account as presented in Ifism, the complete work of Òrúnmìlà, by Mr. C. Osamaro Ibie. The narration and commentary in this presentation are original to Ifa Stories. Cinematic narrative of Ifa Stories. The second marriage of Ejiogbe. Odu, Ejiogbe. There are stories in which prosperity does not begin the danger. It only reveals what has already been forgotten. This is the story of Ejiogbe, of his second wife, Ìwèrè-wèrè, and of a household order that was respected in poverty and broken in abundance. What followed was not a small domestic disagreement. It became a lasting warning. The story says that the first wife of a true son of Ejiogbe will never stay long with him, unless she is fair in complexion. It also says that Ejiogbe's children, those for whom Ejiogbe appeared during Ifa initiation, or Ugbodu, more often than not marry women who belong to the world of witchcraft. If he has 3 wives, at least 2 of them must be witches. The next woman Ejiogbe met was called Ìwèrè-wèrè, and she was a witch. At that time, Ejiogbe was still very poor, and they were living below the starvation line. Whenever they killed a rat, Òrúnmìlà would give the head to the wife. The same thing happened with a fish, a hen, and even a goat. By the time they were able to afford a goat, their fortunes were already beginning to improve. Eventually, they became sufficiently well off to build their own house, raise children, and marry other wives. At that point, Ejiogbe decided to offer thanksgiving to his Ifa. He bought a cow for a big feast and invited other priests who were members of his family. During the feast, while the meat was being shared among the invitees, the senior wife expected, as usual, to be given the head of the cow. After waiting in vain to receive it, she drew it to herself. Almost instantly, some of the more vindictive priests rebuked her. They said that the head was not the right part of a cow to give to a woman, and the cow's head was taken away from her. She paused for some time, allowing her husband the chance to redress the situation. But when no positive reaction came from him, she retired from the feast chamber to her room. 3 days later, she collected her belongings out of Ejiogbe's house and went to live with her brother called Iroko, who gave her sanctuary. With the Thanksgiving ceremonies over, Ejiogbe went out in search of her. After combing everywhere in vain, he went to her brother, who confirmed that he had given her refuge. On seeing Ìwèrè-wèrè, Ejiogbe asked her why she had left him so unceremoniously. With tears in her eyes, she reminded him that when they were poor, he often gave her the head of whatever animal they could afford to slaughter for food, and that no priest or member of his family showed up at that time. She asked why it was that only when they were well off enough to feast with a cow, they came to deny her the privilege of keeping its head. She asked why no member of his family had come before to demand the heads of the rat, the fish, or the hen. In a poetic incantation, she exclaimed, "What man can boast of being bigger than the elephant? Who can claim to be bigger than the buffalo?" Who can boast of being more influential than the king? No head tie can be wider than those used by the elders of the night. No rope can be as long as the one used by the witches. No hat can be more famous than a crown. In width or in breadth, the hand cannot be taller than the head. The palm frond is often taller than the palm leaves on the head of a palm tree. Wherever there is a musical performance, it is the sound of the bell that sounds louder than all other instruments. And the palm tree is more influential than all other trees in the forest. As soon as Ejiogbe heard this poem, he too was in tears and apologized to the wife, asking her to forgive him. The wife then took pity on him and agreed to return with him to the house, but only on the condition that he would appease her with a piece of white cloth, some money, and by serving her head with a goat. This explains why whoever is born by Èjìogbè at Ugbodu is required to serve the head of his senior wife at the height of his prosperity with a goat. He should be told that his senior wife, if yellow, is a benevolent witch who would help him to prosper in life, provided he could refrain from despising her. If, on the other hand, it comes out of divination for a man whose senior wife has left his house, he should be advised to go and beg her to return to him without any delay, lest he would return to penury. The meaning of this story should not be reduced too quickly to one simple lesson about prosperity. This is not a story where Èjìogbè simply refuses religious duty. He does not ignore Ifa. He does not refuse Thanksgiving. In fact, when prosperity comes, he performs a public, sacred obligation. He buys a cow, prepares a great feast, and invites priests from his family. So the issue is more delicate. The problem does not begin because Èjìogbè rejects religion. The problem begins when a private household pattern enters a public ceremonial setting without enough explanation, preparation, or mediation. During poverty, Èjìogbè and Ìwèrè were lived with very little. In those difficult days, when they could afford a rat, a fish, a hen, or later a goat, the head was given to the wife. This should not be treated as a small detail. To Ìwèrè-wèrè, those heads were not only portions of food. They became tied to memory. They became tied to care. They became tied to the life she endured with Èjìogbè before prosperity arrived. But when the cow appears at the Thanksgiving feast, the setting is different. This is no longer only a private matter between husband and wife. The cow belongs to a public, sacred occasion. Priests are present. Family is present. Ceremonial responsibility is present. And in many Yoruba and Afro-diasporic religious contexts, the head of an animal can carry meaning beyond ordinary food. It may be connected to ritual order, religious handling, and ceremonial authority. Because of this, the priests should not be reduced to simple villains. The story says they rebuked Ìwèrè-wèrè and took the cow's head away from her. That action caused pain. But the story does not fully explain what ceremonial reasoning stood behind their action. So the analysis must remain careful. They may have been acting from a public ceremonial understanding of the cow's head, but Ìwèrè-wèrè was seeing the cow's head through the private memory of poverty, loyalty, and recognition. This is where the misunderstanding becomes painful. To the priests, the head may have belonged to the order of the feast. To Ìwèrè-wèrè, the head carried the memory of the life she had shared with Èjìogbè when no one else was present. So her pain is not simply that she did not receive meat. Her pain is that what had once felt like recognition in poverty was removed from her in public prosperity. The question beneath her grief is this: why was I honored when there was little, but denied when there was abundance and witnesses? This is where Èjìogbe's responsibility becomes important. Èjìogbè is not shown as a man who never cared for Ìwèrè-wèrè. He cared for her during poverty. He built prosperity. He fulfilled Thanksgiving. And after she left, he searched for her. But at the moment of conflict, he did not mediate. He stood between two worlds. On one side was the private household memory between himself and Ìwèrè-wèrè. On the other side was the public religious setting of the feast, with priests, family, and ceremonial order. His failure was not the Thanksgiving itself. His failure was that he did not explain the difference between what had happened privately in poverty and what was happening publicly in ceremony. He did not prepare Ìwèrè-wèrè for the ceremonial meaning of the feast. He did not explain her emotional history to the priests. And when the rebuke came, he did not speak quickly enough to prevent the wound. This is why the story should be read as a lesson in responsibility, not only as a lesson in blame. Religious duty requires more than correct materials and public formality. It also requires care for the people who are directly affected by the ceremony. This is especially important in a marriage where two spiritual understandings may not be the same. The story identifies Ìwèrè-wèrè as a witch. That word must be handled carefully. It should not be heard through modern horror, fantasy, or insult. In many Ifa-related narratives, language about witchcraft may point to powerful feminine spiritual force, a different spiritual orientation, or an authority that does not move in the same way as the public priestly order. We should not overstate what the source does not say. The story does not give us enough to declare fully who Ìwèrè-wèrè is beyond the frame it provides. But it does show that she carries spiritual seriousness. Her speech is not shallow. Her grievance is not empty. Her words carry power. That is why her poem matters so much. She does not answer Ejiogbe with ordinary complaint. She answers with sacred reasoning. She asks, what man can boast of being bigger than the elephant? Who can claim to be bigger than the buffalo? Who can boast of being more influential than the king? No head tie can be wider than those used by the elders of the night. No rope can be as long as the one used by the witches. No hat can be more famous than a crown. In width or in breadth, the hand cannot be taller than the head. The palm frond is often taller than the palm leaves on the head of a palm tree. Wherever there is a musical performance, it is the sound of the bell that sounds louder than all other instruments. And the palm tree is more influential than all other trees in the forest. This sacred speech teaches through comparison. It speaks of elephant and buffalo, king and crown, the elders of the night, the hand and the head, the bell and the palm tree. She is not merely saying, I was hurt. She is explaining order. She is explaining proportion. She is explaining that everything has its proper place. And when she says that the hand cannot be taller than the head, she brings the entire conflict back to the symbol of the head. The head in this story has many layers. It is a portion of food. It is a memory of poverty. It is a sign of household recognition. It may also carry ceremonial meaning. And spiritually, the head points toward authority, place, and destiny. So the cow's head becomes the place where all these meanings collide. Private memory meets public ceremony. Marital expectation meets religious responsibility. Emotional recognition meets priestly order. And because the difference was not explained, the feast becomes the place of misunderstanding. This also helps us understand Iroko's role. Ìwèrè-wèrè does not remain in the feast chamber after the dishonor. She leaves. 3 days later, she collects her belongings and goes to her brother Ìroko. This should not be treated as simple rebellion. Ìroko gives her refuge. His house becomes a place of distance, cooling, and protection. Because she is received there, Ejiogbe must leave the setting of the feast and come to where she is. There he must listen. There the matter can be spoken. There correction becomes possible. And Ejiogbe's correction is important. He does not simply defend himself. He hears her words. He weeps. he apologizes, he asks forgiveness, and he accepts the appeasement she requires: white cloth, money, and serving her head with a goat. This is why Ejiogbe should not be presented only through failure. His greatness in this story is not that he never made a mistake. His greatness is that when the truth was placed before him, he humbled himself and corrected the breach. There is also a useful comparison with Ejiogbe's earlier marital difficulty. In that earlier problem, the issue involved neglected offering to Eshu. Here, the situation is different. In this second marriage, Ejiogbe does perform the public religious obligation, but the lesson shifts. Now the problem is not simply ritual neglect. The problem is communication between religious duty and marital understanding. This story teaches that sacred responsibility must not be separated from explanation. A ceremony may be correct in form and still become painful if the people closest to it do not understand their place within it. This is why the story remains useful as teaching. Before public ceremony, there must be preparation. Not only preparation of offerings, not only preparation of food, not only preparation of priests and guests, there must also be preparation of relationship. Those who will be affected by the ceremony need to understand what is happening. They need to understand what belongs to private custom and what belongs to ceremonial order. And those leading the ceremony must be careful not to let sacred formality become public humiliation. This story also must be heard ethically today. It should not be used as a blanket accusation against women. It should not be used to turn the word witch into fantasy, insult, or suspicion toward living people. It should not be used to romanticize unequal treatment in marriage, and it should not be used to dismiss the dignity of a wife because the story comes from a traditional setting where multiple wives appear. The ethical force of the story moves in another direction. The more the household grows, the more responsibility grows. The more public the ceremony becomes, the more careful the communication must be. The more sacred the duty, the more humility is required. The story also does not teach blind endurance of humiliation. Iwere leaves after the dishonor is left uncorrected. Her departure forces the matter to be addressed. And Ejiogbe's search for her shows that repair requires movement, humility, and listening. The ritual boundary must also be respected. The story names the materials of appeasement: white cloth, money, and a goat connected to the head of the senior wife. It also suggests that animal heads in ceremonial settings may carry meaning beyond ordinary food. But this analysis should not become a public ritual manual. The meaning can be discussed. The procedure belongs to verified lineage instruction, proper elders, and the tradition that holds the right. The final teaching is this: what was honored in hardship must not be carelessly denied in abundance. But this story teaches more than that. It teaches that private recognition and public ceremony must be explained to one another. Religious duty requires communication. Marriage requires humility. And when two spiritual understandings meet inside one household, respect must walk before misunderstanding. When that bridge is missing, even a Thanksgiving feast can become the place where the house is wounded. But when correction is made with humility, the road toward balance can open again. This story also gives a deep teaching about marriage, religious difference, and the responsibility of a community. The conflict between Ejiogbe and Ìwèrè-wèrè should not be explained too simply. This was not a story where religion itself destroyed the marriage. It was not a story where Ìwèrè-wèrè rejected Ejiogbe's Ifa. It was not a story where Ejiogbe rejected his sacred obligation. In fact, Ejiogbe did perform Thanksgiving. He bought the cow. He invited the priests. He fulfilled the public religious duty. The problem came because one object carried two different meanings. That object was the head. To the priests, the head of the cow belonged to the public order of the Thanksgiving ceremony. It carried symbolic weight. It carried religious importance. It belonged to a setting where priests, family, sacrifice, authority, and sacred order were present. But to Ìwèrè-wèrè, the head carried a different meaning. It was tied to memory. It was tied to poverty. It was tied to the private life she had shared with Ejiogbe when there was almost nothing. When they had only a rat, he gave her the head. When they had a fish, he gave her the head. When they had a hen, he gave her the head. When they reached the level of a goat, he gave her the head. So when the cow appeared at the feast, she did not see the head only as a ceremonial object. She saw it as the continuation of a household tradition. She saw it as a sign that the place she held in hardship would still be honored in prosperity. This is where the misunderstanding became painful. The priests saw the head through ceremonial order. Ìwèrè-wèrè saw the head through marital memory. Both meanings were serious, but because no one explained the difference, the feast became the place where private memory and public religion collided. Ìwèrè-wèrè took the matter personally because, to her, it was personal. She was not simply reaching for meat. She was reaching for the sign of recognition that had followed her through hardship. And when the priests rebuked her and took the head away, the wound became public. It was no longer only that she did not receive what she expected. It was that what had once represented private honor was taken from her in front of others. This is why Ejiogbe's role is so important. He stood between two worlds. On one side was the world of Ifa ceremony, priestly order, public thanksgiving, and religious authority. On the other side was the world of marriage, memory, private sacrifice, and emotional recognition. His failure was not that he performed thanksgiving. His failure was that he did not prepare the bridge between these two worlds. He did not explain to Ìwèrè-wèrè that the cow's head in a public Thanksgiving feast might not be handled the same way as the head of a rat, fish, hen, or goat in the private household. And he did not explain to the priests that this woman's expectation was not ordinary greed or disorder, but came from a private history that he himself had created with her. This is one of the strongest marriage lessons of the story. When two people belong differently to spiritual, cultural, or family systems, love alone is not enough. There must also be explanation. There must be translation. There must be preparation. There must be humility from both sides. Ìwèrè-wèrè belonged differently from Ejiogbe. The story identifies her as a witch, but this must not be understood through modern horror or insult. In this story, that language points to a different spiritual world, a different kind of feminine spiritual authority, and a different relationship to power. Ejiogbe belonged to the public priestly order of Ifa. Ìwèrè-wèrè belonged to another spiritual orientation. They were joined in marriage, but their ways of reading sacred signs were not the same. That difference did not have to destroy the marriage, but because it was not carefully explained, it became the ground of misunderstanding. This is where modern communities can learn from the story. Many marriages today bring together people from different religious backgrounds, different spiritual houses, different cultures, different families, or different levels of religious understanding. One person may come from a traditional religious background, another may come from Christianity, Islam, Ifa, Lukumi, indigenous spirituality, no formal religion, or a family where religion was not practiced deeply. One person may understand ritual objects, sacred foods, offerings, seating order, family hierarchy, or ceremonial roles. The other may not. The lesson is not that such marriages cannot work. The lesson is that communities must learn to explain, not shame. A person who does not understand a tradition should not be publicly humiliated. A spouse who belongs to the tradition should not assume the other person automatically understands what every object means. And religious elders should not treat every mistake as disrespect. Sometimes what appears as disorder is really a lack of preparation. Sometimes what appears as arrogance is really emotional memory. Sometimes what appears as disrespect is really a person trying to hold on to the only meaning they were ever taught. This story teaches that sacred communities must become better at translation. Not translation from one language to another only, but translation from one world of meaning to another. A modern example can be seen in an interfaith marriage. One spouse may invite the other to a religious ceremony where certain seats, foods, garments, or objects are reserved for elders, initiates, priests, or family roles. If this is not explained beforehand, the other spouse may feel excluded or embarrassed. They may think, "Why am I being pushed away?" But the community may be thinking, "This is simply the order of the ceremony." Both sides may be acting from real meaning, but without explanation, meaning becomes injury. Another example can happen during a wedding. One family may have a custom where elders speak first, sit in certain places, receive certain gifts, or control certain parts of the ceremony. The spouse from another background may feel ignored, especially if they sacrificed greatly to help build the relationship. If no one explains the family or religious order, the spouse may experience tradition as rejection. The problem may not be the tradition itself. The problem is the absence of preparation. A third example can happen during a funeral or ancestral ceremony. One person may understand that certain objects, prayers, foods, or gestures belong to sacred order and cannot be handled casually. Another person may approach them emotionally because they connect those objects to the memory of the deceased or to the family relationship. If the religious community responds harshly, the person may feel wounded. But if the meaning is explained gently, the same moment can become a teaching instead of a humiliation. A fourth example can happen when a couple becomes successful. During poverty, one spouse may have quietly supported the other through school, immigration, illness, unemployment, business failure, or years of financial struggle. But when prosperity comes, the public celebration may become filled with relatives, colleagues, religious leaders, and friends. If the spouse who endured hardship is not recognized, the celebration can become painful. They may feel, "I was present when no one else was here. Why am I invisible now that everyone has arrived?" That is the question of Ìwèrè-wèrè. Why did no one come to demand the head of the rat? Why did no one come to demand the head of the fish? Why did no one come to demand the head of the hen? Why does the rule appear only when the cow has arrived? This is not only a complaint, it is a moral question. It asks whether prosperity has rewritten the memory of hardship. The humility of Ejiogbe is that he eventually listens. He does not continue to hide behind public religion. He does not say, "The priests were right, so your pain does not matter." He does not say, "Because this was ceremony, you have no reason to feel wounded." Instead, he searches for her. He goes to the house of Iroko. He listens to her words. He weeps. He apologizes. He accepts correction. This is humility in marriage. Humility is not only being gentle when everything is peaceful. Humility is being able to hear the pain you helped create. Humility is being able to say, "I did not protect the bridge between you and the world I brought you into." Ìwèrè-wèrè also shows humility, but not the humility of silence. Her humility is disciplined dignity. She does not turn the feast into chaos. She does not destroy the house. She does not answer public pain with uncontrolled revenge. She waits. Then she leaves. She goes to a place of refuge. And when Ejiogbe comes with genuine remorse, she speaks the truth and leaves the road of repair open. This is important for modern marriage. Humility does not mean accepting humiliation. Humility does not mean pretending pain does not exist. Humility does not mean becoming voiceless. True humility allows truth to be spoken without destroying the possibility of restoration. The marriage lesson is therefore shared between them. Ejiogbe teaches the humility of correction. Ìwèrè-wèrè teaches the humility of dignified truth. Ejiogbe teaches that a spouse must not let public authority erase private loyalty. Ìwèrè-wèrè teaches that pain can be spoken with wisdom, proportion, and spiritual seriousness. The community also has a lesson to learn. The priests may have understood the ceremonial importance of the cow's head, but the way they acted caused public injury. This teaches that religious authority must be careful. It is possible to protect sacred order without humiliating someone. It is possible to correct a misunderstanding without destroying dignity. It is possible to say, "This object has a ceremonial meaning," without treating the person as foolish. Modern communities need this lesson. When someone marries into a tradition, enters a new religious house, joins a family ceremony, or attends a sacred gathering, they may not know every rule. Correction should be given with patience. Explanation should come before rebuke. And spouses should not leave their partners alone in a world of symbols they have not been taught to read. This story teaches that acceptance does not mean erasing difference. Ejiogbe does not need to stop being Ejiogbe. Ìwèrè-wèrè does not need to stop being Ìwèrè-wèrè. The priests do not need to abandon ceremonial order, but all of them need a bridge. That bridge is communication. That bridge is humility. That bridge is respect. In today's society, this story can help communities that are divided by religion, culture, gender expectations, family customs, and spiritual identity. It teaches that people often suffer not because difference exists, but because difference is not explained with love. A marriage can survive difference when both people are willing to learn each other's meanings. A household can survive public pressure when the spouses protect each other's dignity. A religious community can preserve sacred order while still welcoming those who do not yet understand it. The final teaching is this: the head was not only a head. To the priests, it was ceremonial authority. To Ìwèrè-wèrè, it was remembered love. To Ejiogbe, it became the test of whether he could honor both. And this is where the story becomes timeless. Before correcting someone, ask what meaning they are carrying. Before feeling rejected, ask what meaning the tradition may be protecting. Before entering public ceremony, prepare the private relationship. And before prosperity gathers witnesses around you, remember the one who stood beside you when there was almost nothing. Marriage requires more than love. It requires translation between worlds. It requires humility before misunderstanding becomes injury. And it requires the courage to repair what public silence has allowed to break.